Crime crackers.
I was drinking coffee and staring at photos of handsome men in Brioni suits in the glossy magazine Martha had left me. Visualizing a dream helps it come true, is what my friend says. So sitting on an old sofa in a rented apartment, I was concentrating on the pictures of wealthy men. My alarm clock rang. It was Thursday, time to go to Adam's. Twice a month, I see my mentee Adam in a psychiatric clinic. Legend has it that I was his social service worker. This low-energy job was also planted on me by Martha. Meanwhile, I'm a journalism student. My parents are hundreds of kilometers away, and I have to earn a living, at least until I find one of those glossy guys wearing Brioni. My visits to Adam were monotonous. I'd bring him something yummy and spend half an hour talking to him. Adam's an oddball, but isn't a bad guy. He's calm, peaceful, mostly silent, and he's constantly making flowers out of paper. I'm wondering who they're for. When Adam wouldn't talk, I did. I told him about my adventures, my love failures, and successes. He listened attentively. Frankly, I wouldn't mind having a brother as sensitive as Adam, preferably not in a psychiatric clinic. After I visited Adam, I would write down everything he said and send it to one of the changing emails. A few days later, I'd get the money. From whom? Hell if I know. The payer's name was different all along. I almost screwed up once. I nearly slept through my visit. There was a party, and then Martha dragged me to a club for more cocktails. I wasn't going to stay there for long, but all of a sudden I saw him. Those blue eyes made up for even the lack of a Brioni suit. I was ready to follow him anywhere with a stupid, happy smile on my face. In short, I fell hard for him. Martha was looking at me in surprise and listing Mark's drawbacks. He was a graduate student with no real money and no guarantees for the future. She was disappointed. And then I was late at the clinic for the first time. Adam seemed nervous. I told him about my new crush. Mark's name stirred up a storm of emotion. Adam yelled, demanded that I stop seeing Mark, and even tore apart one of his paper flowers. I had to wrap up my visit earlier. Damn it, I shouldn't have come late. Sick people like to stick to a regime. The nurse calmed me down and said it was all the effects of a new medication. They started giving it to Adam as a felony patient. I'm not sure what stunned me more, Adam's rage or the fact that he's a felon. That's quite a twist. I'll be honest, at first I wanted to decline further visits, but then my curiosity won out. Besides, they pay good money. So the customer didn't find out what had happened from my report. The next time, Adam was humble. He even handed me a flower. But then it turned out it wasn't for me. He asked me to pass it on to Mark. Well, he's going to be happy to get a flower from a psycho. At home, Mark, who was now staying with me from time to time, unwrapped the flower and we found a drawing in there, a pretty good one. There was a handsome boy of about 15. Could he be Adam's victim? On the back of the sheet, I noticed some text. The letters were tentative, painstakingly scrawled, the way children usually write. In the letter, Adam referred to Mark as his best friend. He was wondering why it was taking Mark so long to show up. Perhaps he's forgotten their arrangement. Adam was asking when Mark would finally come to take him so they could take the flowers to Emily. I was quite confused. There were more questions than answers. In addition, I had to tell Mark about Adam. He didn't seem to like it. Say, what if Adam gets aggro again? I made a joke. Then I'll call you and say the code phrase, Martha got the keys. Mark didn't appreciate my humor, but my professional interest was already piqued. The next time I showed up at the clinic early, I wanted to find out more about Mark. The orderly disappointed me. During his 7 years at the clinic, Adam had never had a visitor named Mark. But I kept up with my questions. Did he have someone by that name? A relative? A close friend? A brother? The nurse was surprised. Adam is an orphan. Strangely, you're not aware of it. I had to say I'd forgotten. Adam didn't mention Mark during this visit. In fact, he hardly spoke at all. I guess they must have increased his medication dosage. After the meeting, the head doctor called me into his office for the first time. I immediately noticed his expensive watch and brand-name shoes. My admission as a social worker was clearly paid for by someone. And I'm probably not the only one like this here. Without much preamble, the doctor informed me that I was a bad influence on the patient. I kind of upset the fragile psyche of the patient and can undermine their treatment progress. Well, I'm not a doctor myself, but I believe that drugging a person with psychotropics and turning him into a vegetable does not sound like treatment progress. I not only thought this way, but also managed to say it out loud. I immediately scolded myself and did my best to be sweet to soften the end of the conversation. It helped. Our next meeting with Adam didn't get canceled, and I did my best to be prepared for it. Adam sketched a teenager on the flower. I figured they knew each other from childhood, so I had to find out more about the orphanage where he'd grown up. I lied to Adam, seeing Mark, who promised to come visit soon. I told him that Mark was recalling their childhood and asked if Adam remembered the best days of their friendship. It worked. Adam eased up and started smiling. That's how I learned the details of their life in the orphanage and how Mark was a great friend. He defended Adam and protected him from the harsh teachers who were always trying to accuse Adam unfairly. They'd been the best friends ever until Mark had forbidden to talk about her. At that point, a nurse came into the appointment room. Time's up. I was so engaged with this whole Adams thing that I barely had time for the real Mark, my boyfriend. After I got on an intercity train and left for the town where the orphanage was located without letting him know, we had our first fight. Mark was furious. He'd found information about Adam, about him being a murderer killing a young girl. And Mark believed that I was taking a huge risk by getting involved. Do you think that's what brought me back? Not at all. No one at the orphanage remembered the guys. I was disappointed and was about to leave when an elderly man appeared through the massive hallway doors. The former principal of the orphanage had long since retired, but on Wednesdays he came to play bridge with a guard. Luckily for me, it was Wednesday that day. The man saw the drawing and recognized Mark, and then he remembered Adam. Adam was a good, kind kid. Maybe not as smart as the others, but he had the humanity for 3. The former principal said, "Were they friends?" Oh, no, they weren't. Mark was using Adam. He could steal something from the dining room or break something and blame it on Adam. They'd scold him, and Mark would pretend to defend his friend. Adam trusted him. Sometimes we misread people. They say Mark has become quite a well-to-do entrepreneur. Well, no surprise there. I drove back to the city. A feeling of pity for Adam clutched at my throat. I couldn't believe he was a murderer. By then, I had already interned at the city newspaper and had a journalist's license. All of the above, my natural chutzpah along with that, helped me make a visit to the retired detective who had once handled Adam's case. The detective was a little surprised by my visit. Adam had killed a girl, Emily Wilson, 23 at the time. He confessed almost immediately and should have gone to jail. But someone paid the lawyers and Adam ended up in a psychiatric hospital. Police recovered another person's DNA at the crime scene, but no matches were found. And Adam's confession negated the need for further investigation. I asked if there was anything about the case that was suspicious. The detective shrugged. Well, Adam sometimes got confused in his testimony, forgot details, but the doctors later found out he wasn't too, bright, as they say. After all, a confession is a confession, so the investigation was wrapped up. I was digging for information about that Mark, but it was as if he didn't exist. Meanwhile, my Mark was totally pissed off. Chasing a murderer is not the job of an upstart journalist. It's the police's job. I took offense and yelled at him. In short, it didn't end up well. Mark didn't call that night. The last time we met, Adam looked sad. I tried to talk to him, but in vain. He stayed silent and just kept folding his paper flowers. At the end of the meeting, he said he figured it out. Mark had betrayed him. He had forgotten his friend Adam and would never come back. Emily will remain without flowers. I didn't know what to do next. Mark didn't call. I was crushed. It's been a week. Martha came in, found me sour, and dragged me to another party. That's where I met Brandon. I mean, he's the one who came up to hook up with me.
Well,
I've had bad luck before, but this time I hit the jackpot. 35 years old, running a business, loads of money, and you're gonna laugh, a Brioni suit. When Brandon left to get another cocktail, Mark came over to our table. He was there with some friends. Damn it, My thoughts were jumbled, and my words only added up to awkward excuses. Mark said, "Have a good time," and walked away, probably for good. I finished my next cocktail in one gulp. Eventually, we were on our way to Brandon's. I don't remember much of that night. Brandon drove to a meeting the next morning, and I wandered sleepily around the apartment. Ornate furniture, outrageously expensive accessories, photos on the wall, Brandon on safari, Brandon and his partners at the opening of a new shopping center, young Brandon at the lake. Whoa, wait a second. That guy in the photo looked too much like the one in Adam's drawing. A cold sweat threw me. Okay, Alice, calm down. You don't know how much time you have before he comes back, so you have to act fast. I raced around the rooms like a frantic animal, opening and closing drawers, rifling through books, looking everywhere I could. And I found it. My reports of my meetings with Adam, where I detailed what he'd said and how he'd behaved. They were printed out and folded in a gray, discreet folder. I got frightened. I dashed to the bathroom, picked a few hairs from Brandon's comb, and wrote him a quick note. I got an urgent call for an editorial. "You were great. See you later." And I hurried out. I drove to the detectives and gave him Brandon's hair. It took me a while to convince him to run a DNA test, and he stared at me like I was nuts. I was at home, all nervous, when my doorbell rang. It was Brandon. His perfect brioni was now making me cringe. He asked me out on a date to a new restaurant. I knew it was quite a risk. However, I decided to accept it to avoid arousing suspicion while I was waiting for the results of the DNA test. To be on the safe side, I called Martha and told her I was going out to dinner with Brandon. She was happy that our relationship was progressing, and I just grinned bitterly. On the highway, Brandon's car took a sharp turn and we drove out of town. That's when I realized he knew everything. Brandon proved my guess. His apartment had a state-of-the-art security system rigged with hidden cameras. He saw what I was doing there. He also knew from the head doctor what I was asking Adam about. And he knew about the police. We arrived at a small cabin in the woods. Brandon assured me that this quiet place was his secret hideaway from the world. Hence, no use yelling. He was quite upset that I ruined everything. Said he liked my reports on Adam. Too bad I'm gonna have to be killed now. At this, let's face it, not the best moment of my life, my cell phone rang. Brandon ordered me to put it on speaker. It was Mark. He was going to suggest we meet at the bar. It was obvious he was offended, but his voice was so frustrated that it gave me some hope. I replied that I'd like to meet him too, but I was late at work and would love for him to wait for me at home. And then added, "The keys are at Martha's." At Martha's, got it? Dear God, what was I expecting? Inevitable death activated every single instinct in me. I had a moment, and pretending to disconnect from the conversation, I turned on a voice recorder. Even if I won't manage to escape, the record might help to put this scumbag behind bars. I started coaxing him into a detailed confession, question by question, and he started talking. He seemed to be doing it with pleasure, showing off himself.
That night 7 years ago, I was feeling on a roll. I had signed a successful business expansion contract the day before and was keen to celebrate it. Just imagine, a beggar in ragged pants. A kid from an orphanage is finally at the top of the social food chain. I changed my name right after the orphanage, as well as my biography. I invented a new life for myself. I hooked up with Emily in a bar. I used to do that all the time. I took her to my place and offered her drugs. I wanted to test this new way of having fun. The bitch refused, saying something about being allergic. So I drugged her drink. Everything was going great. But then all of a sudden, she stopped breathing. A minute ago, I felt like I called the shots and looked forward to a bright future. And now I was looking at prison. I couldn't let this happen. I called the dumbass Adam and convinced him to take the blame. I had to put on a whole act to get him to agree. I put the fool in a mental hospital and told him I'd get him out in a year and a half, though I wasn't going to do that. Adam had to turn into a vegetable, forgetting not only me but even who he is himself. And it would have worked perfectly fine if you hadn't gotten involved. Your job was to keep track of Adam's words and report back to me, but you started poking around.
Mark showed up in the room out of the blue. He signaled for me to be quiet, and then he knocked Brandon out with a baseball bat. Turns out, Mark installed a tracking app on my phone after I went to the orphanage without telling him. But I'm not mad about it. It saved my life. Brandon, aka Mark's DNA matched what police found at the crime scene 7 years ago. After the trial, I published this detective story and thus started my brilliant journalistic career. Adam got released, and we finally took his flowers to Emily.